In this video, I want to talk about the difference between a telescoping fishing pole and a heavier duty spider beam mast. At first glance, they look pretty similar. Both are about 1.1 metres tall and both are telescoping rods inside. But as you'll hear later, differences are significant. The most obvious difference is when you pick it up. The spider beam weighs 3.3 kilograms. Whereas this fishing pole, I'd say it would be under 1. With this, you can walk indefinitely and not feel the burden of its weight, whereas this would definitely be too heavy on long walks, particularly if you're carting other equipment. Another difference was felt down here. The squid pole came from Haverfords in Sydney, costing around $50. The spider beam came from TTS here in Melbourne and cost around $200. Although you can also order direct from Spider Beams. I'll include all those links in the comments section below. So what do you get for your money? Is it worth spending 4 times on this pole than that? For a start, the Spider Beam is longer. This squid pole is only 9 metres, but many people find they can't use the top section because it's too thin to support any wire thicker than thinnest you can buy. Now you might not think the difference between 9 and 12 metres is significant, and you're probably right if you're just using the pole to support an inverted L for casual HF use. But with certain other types of antennas, it's desirable to have a height of much greater than 10 metres. For instance, a ground plane antenna on 7 MHz. If you want it to be full-sized, you'll need 10 metres vertical. Then it's good practice to have the feed point somewhat above the ground, let's say 2 metres. Then you can have elevated radials sloping gently towards the ground with possibly tent pegs to hold them out. You can do that easily with a 12 metre mast, but with 9 metres you can't. The extra height is also useful if you wanted to make a vertical beam for 20 metres, where the element lengths are a bit over 10 metres.
Here's a look at the end of the 2 poles. The squid pole with its loop and the end of the spider beam pole without one. But this is a bit unfair to the spider beam because there's actually a top section which goes very thin indeed. That broke off, but the top of this would be around 2 millimeters and very floppy, whereas this is quite rigid.
The additional rigidity can help, particularly if building antennas on the lower HF bands. Although thin wire is easy to support with a thin squid pole, there are times when the losses increase if you're using it. For instance, if you're using a vertical on 160 metres that might be a fraction of a quarter wavelength, like it might only be 10 or 15 metres long, then thicker wire can reduce losses. Also, if you're using a loading coil, that can be hard to support on a thin squid pole. In both those instances, a larger pole like this, which is stronger, will come into its own. Now I'm going to see if I can put this pole up. I've got some Velcro strap, the type I usually use for the 9 metre squid pole. As you can see, it hardly took any time at all. One thing with these big poles is they can be difficult to handle, especially if you're trying to do it from the end. Much easier if you need to lift a pole is to go to the centre of gravity, which will be a little bit towards the big end. Then the pole can be held up with ease. One thing with a spider beam is both ends can come off easily. That can be embarrassing if you're carrying this when crossing the road. Make sure you use good tape to support the ends before you leave home. So, what's my conclusion? Both types of masts are of great use for the radio amateur. If you're a beginner, don't want to spend a lot of money, or are just using lightweight wire antennas, like Infeds made from the thinnest type of hookup wire for 40 and 20 metres, then this small squid pole is probably the best one to get. It's also great if you're going on long walks, as it's really not heavy at all to carry. In contrast, if you're interested in 80 and 160 metres, and particularly verticals with loading coils, then the Spiderbeam pole is definitely the better option. I'd also suggest it for gain antennas, as you'll be able to achieve more height. I'd also suggest the Spiderbeam if you're renting a house, or you live in an area where the council doesn't like you putting up tall structures. In that case, you can put up the mast when you want to be on the air and pull it down when you're not. We've spoken about the antenna poles, but what about the antennas to put them on? For ideas on that, you need Minimum QRP. It's an ebook that gives you all the details of making the most with low power amateur radio. It's a top seller with over 2,000 sold. Get yours today. Go onto Kindle and search Minimum QRP, or visit my website and follow the link to Minimum QRP. You'll be glad you did.